serious update. There's been a development on Leicester's troubles.
Unfortunately, it seems that I underplayed the situation when I said that their situation was dire and that they were in danger of going bankrupt. What I didn't know is that...
What would happen if Spurs got relegated? It's now looking like something that genuinely could happen.
It's 5-1. How many of those sponsors have got clauses in their sponsorship agreements which specifically say what would happen in the event of a relegation from the Premier League?
What we invest in our Winter Olympic sports is 10% of what we invest in our summer.
We're not saying that 30 million quid over a cycle is not a lot of money. Of course it is. But in the big scheme of our national expenditure, it's not even a drop in the ocean. Mourinho's comments is more troublesome for football than one young idiotic player allegedly making a remark.
It's victim blaming.
So what Mourinho's saying is...
Hello, Charlie.
Hello, Charlie.
How are you?
Well, after having, I think I was sympathetic about your tonsillitis last week. I've had a rather more serious illness, otherwise known as a common cold. And it's actually landed me up, sort of feeling a little bit low in the water, but also, unfortunately, sounding a bit like Keir Starmer. It's not in my control. I'm going to sound rather nasal today.
Well, tell me, Charlie, are you going to say things of more substance than Keir Starmer?
Well, I think the readers, so the listeners rather, will have to be the judge of that, Charlie. But I'm certainly hoping not to change my mind quite so often.
Oh, well, it's a good start. It's a good start. I don't think people would normally level changing your mind as something that you're susceptible to. So we can see.
I'm not sure about that. I'm capable on it. That's sort of one of the great traits you learn as a newspaper columnist, which is what I was towards the start of my career, is that you can quite easily turn on a sixpence and argue exactly the opposite way. 6 months later, as Boris Johnson, my old boss, demonstrated when he famously wrote the case for Brexit and the case against Brexit before working out what he was going to do. So I can't guarantee not changing my mind.
So you about to tell me that you love live golf?
Not yet, but I'm reserving the right to change my mind on live golf at a later date without people telling me that I'm a charlatan.
How was your weekend? Any nice sporting achievements? Or
I did watch the rugby.
Yeah,
I watched the rugby.
Wasn't great, was it?
I thought it was a good occasion, right? So if you're just looking at it from the outside and saying, let's say that I'm not English and I'm not Scottish, in actual fact I'm both. So I can sort of look at it with a sort of degree of equanimity and say, I thought as an occasion, unlike the Wales match the previous week, which was a total damp squib, Wales just didn't turn up at all. I felt as an occasion it sort of lived up to it. It's just a pity that that England sort of somehow couldn't find their mojo. You're more of a rugby guy than me. How would you have judged it?
Well, I thought it was classic Scotland again, isn't it? I mean, every year they seem to manage to do this. If they could step up for other games like they step up for England, they might actually win something.
Yeah.
They seem to treat the England game like winning the Six Nations. I'm sure I'm going to please loads of Scots with this. It's brilliant. But
I think they're just going to see it as sour grapes.
I'm going
to put my Scottish hat on. This is Tam O'Shanter. I'm going to put that on and say, sounds like sour grapes.
Look, I'm just taking what Dan Biggar said when he turned around looking at what Wales did when they started becoming a Grand Slam winning team rather than just let's beat England team. And he said it was the minute we stopped looking at the England match as the be all and end all. We had to look past it. It's a step on the road. Scotland, if I was a Scotland fan, I'd be frustrated with that performance as well in a way, because I do look at it going, if we're capable of that, why do we have the inconsistencies across our performance? Every year it seems to be their year in some way, and then there's something like the Italy game. But no, look, in all jokes aside, I thought they played brilliantly. They played the occasion really well, and England couldn't handle it. So,
well, I mean, they've got a fly half who is, who on his day is the best fly half in the world probably. And if he is on his day, so I suspect that it may not be a function of is the whole team doing X, Y, or Z. Sometimes it might be is Finn Russell on one of those days where he can make magic happen. I think I saw some stats saying that that if you look at the rugby equivalent of XG, they finished off a significant number of the chances that they created, and that often is the fly half having one of those days.
Our first 20-25 minutes, they battered England, battered them. So it was great. And then, rugby aside, did you see the weekend culminated in the big finale of the event that we've been talking about for the last few weeks? India played Pakistan.
Yes. And it was not particularly... It was anticlimax?
I think so.
Bit of an anticlimax.
Yeah, it kind of lived up to expectation if you've been following India versus Pakistan matches in tournaments over the last few years anyway. India won by 61 runs. Pakistan were 114 all out. It was all relatively easy and straightforward. And I would say after the build-up, not quite as dramatic or thrilling as the ICC or the BCCI may have hoped?
Well, I don't know. I imagine the BCCI are delighted with crushing Pakistan mercilessly. And the ICC, which is basically the same as the BCCI, will have just been delighted the match went ahead. Yeah. So I think all's well that ends well for Indian cricket in that regard.
It's been quite exciting on the old tournament. England obviously have not looked great, and Australia have just gone out.
Australia have gone out. England have looked sort of very weak. There have been a few interviews of Harry Brook that have slightly concerned me. He is obviously a very, very talented batsman, but part of the act of being a super elite sportsman, and certainly being a leader in super elite sport, is the ability to confront imperfection head on, bravely, and to say, it's not good enough, needs to get better. When I listen to interviews of Harry Brook, there's a heavy dose of see no evil, hear no evil about it. Yeah, I thought we were really good today. You're just a couple of little details here and there and all this type of stuff. And it strikes me that here is a cricketer who, in England terms, has grown up in the Bazball era, where there has been that kind of relentless positivity message. And he doesn't have, unlike Joe Root, who has had other inputs in his career from different types of coaches and different types of leaders and all that stuff, he doesn't seem to have the ability to go, okay, that positivity thing's great, but there are also, other ways to look at it as well. And I do need to sometimes look in the mirror and say, actually, we weren't good enough today. Not so much to please the fans, but almost like you've got to remember that you're speaking to your players as well. And you're setting a standard there. It doesn't mean to say you have to get really angry and abuse the players. But I think it does mean that whenever you hear a lack of honesty towards the top of sport, I don't know, my little red flashing light goes again. The only thing to say is that with Australia being out, England would still say on a one-off occasion, particularly in T20, which is quite unpredictable, we'd have a chance. But if you looked at it strictly on form, you'd say no chance.
We've been talking about the dominance of those top teams and that being a concern. I think actually if this tournament so far has shown anything, it's that there are some other teams that are actually on their day excellent. You look at what Nepal did against England. You look at what Italy did when they chased down, I can't remember who they were playing against. They chased down for the loss of no wicket. Scotland have looked all right. Zimbabwe beat Australia. Yeah. You've seen quite a few results in here that suggest there is competition in the short form.
And I think the shorter the form of cricket, the more likely you are to get surprises, right? Yeah. Because ultimately, if one batsman gets going, he gets his eye in and smashes it around a bit, as happens, that can happen, then the match can swing in a different direction. Yeah. The longer the form of cricket, the more you're going to get tested out across all the disciplines, why it's called a test. And I think that's the reason why it would be so tragic for cricket to lose the long form, because actually that is the thing that really decides who the best side is. Anyhow,
finally, just before we move on, I thought the Australian media's explanation of their exit was perfect in some of the papers, saying it was just so incredibly England.
Is that Australia basically trying to sort of, chuck an insult in our direction to cloak their own discomfort? Or actually, is it just the ultimate insult for an Australian?
Well, it sounds a bit like me criticising Scotland for making England.
No, that was sour grapes. Yeah. That was sour grapes. in this case, I'm just trying to work out, is it that they're trying to sort of like just make themselves feel better? Or actually, even worse, is it in Australian cricket just the ultimate insult?
That probably is. Yeah.
Listen, mate, that's English. That is.
There's
right?
no better way to make the team hurt than say you played like England.
I mean, like all the big bristling moustaches in the world drooping as they hear this horrible insult. You're very English in your batting today.
Shake off the mullets.
Yeah.
Which was a look at Leicester's troubles, should we call it. And firstly, thank you so much. We've had some amazing engagement from everyone on this. It looks like that's resonated, and Charlie did do a fantastic job of breaking it down in a way that I certainly haven't seen. There has been, a little more that's come through some of those comments, and should we say it doesn't make you feel more confident of their position?
No, I think, when you paint a pretty bleak picture like we did about Leicester City's financial situation last week, I wouldn't say I was looking forward to being corrected and told that everything was right, because, we don't come on this podcast to get things wrong. But such is my deep concern for the future of the club that I would have quite, contentedly come on this podcast and said, actually, it's not as bad as it looks. Unfortunately, it seems that I underplayed the situation when I said that their situation was dire and that they were in danger of going bankrupt. What I didn't know, but what various people from inside the Leicester City ecosystem have been in touch to inform me, is that in actual fact, far from being able to use the parachute payment next season, their second parachute payment, as a cushion to try and help them reorganise themselves in the event of a relegation from the Championship to League One, that parachute payment has already been factored. Now, what factoring means is that effectively you take a payment or a set of payments that you are contractually guaranteed to receive, and you go to the bank and say, can you give us that money up front? Right? So they could go to the bank, in this case it was Macquarie, an Australian bank, and say, well, next season we're going to receive £45 million in parachute payments from the Premier League for our second season. Here's the contract, it's guaranteed. Macquarie say, okay, give me that contract. That is now effectively our contract. We now receive that money. And in return, we're going to give you that money here up front, so you don't have to wait for it. And then we're going to charge you an interest rate over the intervening period between when we give you the money up front and when we receive the money. So effectively, what our sort of, I hesitate to call them spies, what our friends in the Leicester City ecosystem have told us is that money's gone, right? Or if it hasn't gone, then it's very close to going. It has already been drawn down. Whether it's already been spent, I don't know. But here's something which makes me fear the worst. I saw a little note in the local media, which somebody sent me, which said that Leicester City were late in paying their staff wages in December. So effectively, normally what you'd expect in December is for the player wages and all the staff wages to be paid just ahead of Christmas, instead of which the staff were not paid until the very end of the month, right? So, so what? I hear everyone saying it's only a week's difference. The thing is that it's something that you do as an absolute last resort. You do that because the finance director says there is no money in the bank to pay them, right? You don't sit there, sat on a pile of money over Christmas going, ho, 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 wouldn't it be fun to ruin our staff's Christmas by not paying them for December?
It's 2,000 people.
Right? It's a lot of people, and therefore quite a lot of money on a monthly basis. So clearly there was money which was due to come in, which was meant to pay those wages, which then didn't come in exactly when it was meant to, which led to the finance director saying, if we were to try and pay those wages right now, there would be no money in the bank account at all. Therefore, we're going to pay those wages late. Now, I should note that Leicester City themselves said that the reason for this, they told their staff that the reason for this was to put Leicester staff members on the same schedule as King Power's staff members. I find this difficult to credit.
Strange time to do that.
If I'm being honest with you, I find it difficult to credit for a couple of reasons. First of all, they're totally separate companies. I mean, they're not co-joined. The fact that money has historically been taken from King Power to fund Leicester doesn't mean to say that they're the same business. They're not in the same country. They're not even operating under the same accounting rules. They're not run by the same people. They don't have the same finance department. There is no reason why those two companies would have exactly the same payment schedules. They wouldn't. But secondly, if you remember what we said last week, which is that the management of that company has been taken over by the guy who was previously running their chief creditor, right? He's the chief executive now. So it's quite a sort of stretch to imagine the new chief executive of King Power saying, I'm in charge of King Power now. The former owners are now no longer running King Power on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis. But it's very important to me that I pay King Power's staff at the same time as they pay Leicester City's staff, or vice versa. It would be totally bizarre. They are under two different managements. So I didn't give that, to be honest with you, I didn't credit that as being a particularly convincing explanation. But if the coffers were indeed that empty only a month ago, and these parachute payments have been drawn down, it just slightly concerns me that maybe has that money already been spent? Mm-hmm. I don't know.
And to be clear, we were using the justification of support or sustainability next year as them receiving
indeed
this money. So if that money's not going to be there next year,
right?
Not going to be received next year, where's the money going to come from next year should they get relegated?
And I then saw, Charlie, and I'm just going to put it up on my phone here because it came in quite late. Somebody also sent me saying that a note saying that Leicester City have also factored the transfer payments that they were due to receive on three players, Tom Cannon, James Justin and Casey McAteer, who were sold for around about 20 million quid between them. And the way in which transfer fees are structured, as many people will know, but I'll spell it out for those who don't, is when you sell a player, you don't often receive the full amount for that transfer fee in one clump straight away. What will often happen if you sell a player for 10 million is that the club who's buying the player will say, well, we'll give you 5 million up front, 2.5 million next January, and then another 2.5 million the following year. So what they've done is they've gone to the bank again and said, can you give us that money now? And then you will then receive that money from the buying clubs when it comes in, and we'll pay you interest in the meantime.
To be clear, this is a common,
totally common
lever pulled at the moment by a number of clubs.
It's totally common. But here's the thing: when a club is factoring literally everything that they have, it sort of feels to me, because it comes at a cost. You pay interest on it, so it's not 3%. You get charged bank rate plus, because obviously otherwise Macquarie don't make any money out of it, right? So it could be 7%, it could be 8%, it can be 10%, it can be 11%, depending on the perceived counterparty risk, etc. This it sort of feels to me like the owning family whose surname you have mastered, Charlie.
Shrivadana Prabha.
Does it feel to me like they've actually stopped putting money in, and that basically the finance team at Leicester have been desperately pulling whatever money they possibly can to keep the wolf from the door this season, and almost, well, we'll worry about next season when we come to it.
But I mean, based on your evaluation of King Power and the situation they're in, it looks exactly like that. They are in administration.
And it would make sense, wouldn't it? Because when you think about it, if you were previously using dividends coming from King Power to fund Leicester City, and if King Power was taken effectively into administration last summer and therefore stopped paying out dividends,
you would factor all of the money that you need.
Then you no longer have your normal way of funding Leicester City, which is to take money from your profits from King Power and slide it into Leicester City. And the finance director at Leicester then has to basically say, okay, if I'm not going to be receiving those cash floats from King Power, where am I going to get it from? Okay, I've just been relegated from the Premier League. I've just received my parachute payment for this season, but I'm probably going to need to factor my parachute payment early for next season. And I'm also going to need to factor all of my transfer sales that I've still got to come in, because I need all that money now. I can't afford to wait for it to come in later.
Yeah.
And this goes back to the core question that I posed. So there are a few people who I'm sort of targeting with this. Rather like we said 2 or 3 weeks ago, ECB, are you listening? This time I'm saying, what the hell is the Leicestershire local media doing? What is the point of being a local journalist if you can't put this together and ask the right questions? A free press is part of the functioning of a successful, vibrant country. And I'm reading the local media there. I took the time this week, I wish I hadn't, to read it. And it's just totally see no evil, hear no evil. Oh yeah, we lost a game. Leicester lost a game. Ooh, that's bad. They got a 6-point deduction. Ooh, that's bad. But no attempt whatsoever to string things together, to ask questions of the powers that be, and then bang the table when you don't get an answer and this type of stuff. So that's one target. Next target is, is the independent football regulator, which is saying, I bet you that they are all over this. I bet you they are. Now they're not going to say so publicly.
Yeah.
Here comes the question: what can they do about it? With the way in which things are structured, we're told that this is exactly the kind of situation that they are there to prevent. What can they do about it?
Ultimately, what you're looking at is eventually their luck is going to run out. They're going to stop having payments they can factor against. To be clear, at time of recording, they are 2 points behind West Brom in the relegation spot. So if the season ends tomorrow, they are relegated to League One. And financially, we know the impact of that. So this now is looking far less like a hypothetical, like we're about to talk about, and far more like a very realistic situation that, if not managed very, very carefully in the next few months, is going to be an absolute catastrophe for one of this country's great footballing institutions.
I think it's an early test of the football regulator. Say, okay, with the powers that you've been given, what can you do? Now, if you look at the situation at the moment, the IFR is up and running. It is already in charge of the regulation of existing owners. It has not yet taken over the regulation of new ownerships. That gets taken over at the end of this season. But as things currently stand, each club in the English football pyramid is assigned a handler, effectively an account manager. So there's a guy who sits there at the independent football regulator, and he has 6 clubs that he is meant to oversee, right? And you can imagine when they were handing these clubs out, and it came down, it's rather like with the FA Cup draw, who's next? And you can imagine the head of the IFR, David Cogan, going, right, who wants Leicester? And various accountants scurrying away to hide behind filing cabinets until eventually some poor bunterish figure, eyes glinting behind his specs, emerges to accept responsibility for this gruesome task. Right? So there is a guy or a girl sat right now in the independent football regulator in Whitehall whose responsibility it is to oversee the sustainability, the finances of Leicester City. And I would be absolutely fascinated to understand not just what they and their boss David Cogan thought about this, but also to understand, because it's not really fully spelled out, what they can do about it. Now, what they can do is they can withdraw the license of the owner to operate. But what does that mean in practice? Does that mean that effectively then they can basically force a fire sale of the club? Okay, maybe. The EFL was sort of edging that direction with Reading and with Sheffield Wednesday. They were using their power to withdraw a license effectively as a way to force a sale. But in this case, the challenge is you're basically going out into the market looking for a buyer who's willing to take on these massive financial challenges. I just don't know how that's going to work out yet. We will find out, whether it be with Leicester or another club, because there are various other clubs that are also in financial difficulties. We will find out sooner rather than later exactly what powers the independent football regulator has.
Yeah.
But one thing that is clear from a political perspective, remember that the independent football regulator was set up by politicians, not by the football industry. The intention of the politicians was that they would set up the IFR to stop clubs going bust. So let's see how effective that is going to be.
One thing the topic did throw up was a lot of discussion, as you just mentioned, around other clubs that were in similar sticky situations or facing some form of financial hardship through their performance this season. Now, the first topic we were going to talk about plays on very nicely. I say this with no glee as a Chelsea fan, obviously.
You can't keep it out of your face, let alone out of your voice. Sorry, for those people who are listening to this, and they're out there, they're having a walk, they're trying to get over the latest disastrous defeat for their beloved Tottenham Hotspur, and they're having to listen to a Chelsea fan smirking. Well, if you can listen to somebody smirking, but I can tell you that he is smirking.
Title of topic 1, just not wanting to get anything wrong. What would happen if Spurs got relegated? Now, all jokes aside, yes, that may sound silly. I think it sounded silly and very speculative for a very long time, and has done actually for well over a year. But I would say it's now looking like something that genuinely could happen.
It's 5-1, right? It's 5-1. So it's gone from being something which people talked about as I guess, if things like Leicester City winning the Premier League could happen, then we have to confront the possibility that maybe Spurs getting relegated could happen. It's moved from there to being 5-1.
And this is not just this season as well. And this is where, when everyone's been bringing this up, it's been built on a number of things that have been a disaster over the last few weeks. Thomas Frank getting fired, more losses in the Premier League. Christian Romero coming out on multiple occasions criticising the ownership of the club. And so it's very easy to get caught up in recency bias in this stuff. But actually, let's just remember that Spurs finished 17th last year.
Yeah.
So I was looking at the last 18 months just to try and draw out on a slightly larger pool of data to understand how this situation has developed. And if you just look at performance, they have lost 33 of the last 64 games in the Premier League. Last season, they won 11, drew 5, lost 22 games, had a -1 goal difference and finished with 38 points. This year, won 7, drawn 8, lost 11, -1 goal difference, points 29.
So the point is it's consistent.
The point is it's consistent, and it's consistent in completely the wrong direction.
Since about October 2024, over a course of almost a year and a half, they have been probably in the bottom of 4 or 5 performers in the Premier League.
Completely.
Yeah.
And if we are talking about that magic 40-point mark, They failed to get that last year. They were very lucky because the teams that got relegated were pretty rubbish.
Yeah.
And therefore they never really looked in danger. And that allowed Ange to focus on Europe. But the issues were fundamental. Yeah. So we've started to see this, a continuation of this year. Obviously, I think it's become more on people's minds because Thomas Frank left and Igor Tudor's been brought in, which is an interesting appointment in its own right, if you're looking at Premier League survival being the absolute key focus now. But it has brought up this question of, could a Big Six team actually get relegated? Now, let's just put this into context of the business, because this is where we'll dive in to hopefully look at it in a slightly different way.
I think that's right, Charlie. I don't really want to get into sort of too much of an argument here about the playing side of it and the whys and wherefores of it. There are plenty of other shows that do that. Suffice it to say that it's no longer something which to be dismissed as a faint possibility. It is an active possibility. It's probably only 2 bad results away. Don't forget they're playing Arsenal this weekend, right? So leave aside that they're their local rivals. Arsenal are also the best side in the league. So they're playing the best side in the league this weekend. So there's every possibility that after that match, it's going to go from 5-1 to 7-2. And we absolutely should be discussing the 7-2 chance that one of the Big Six gets relegated. Absolutely we should, but we should be looking at it in business terms, as you're about to.
Because by the impact of that, as we've just looked at with Leicester, if they did go down, would be significant. I don't think that's an understatement.
It's actually, I would say, unprecedented because very big clubs have been relegated from England's top division in the past. Almost all clubs at some point have been relegated.
I think everyone apart from Everton and Arsenal.
But the vast majority of those relegations happened in an era when really the financial impact of these things was very, very much smaller. The vast majority of your income came through ticketing. Your players were paid much, much less and often on shorter contracts. So effectively, whilst it might have been very painful for Spurs, for instance, to get relegated, I think it was in 1977, just after I was born, so almost 50 years ago, it wasn't existential because they didn't yet have these vast cost bases that the Premier League clubs, but particularly the Big Six clubs, have built up. Why do Big Six clubs build up these vast cost bases?
Because they don't think they'll get relegated.
Because they know that they can't get relegated.
Or
that's why.
I mean,
that is why.
And if you look at the numbers, okay, we're talking about a business dropping out of the Premier League that has £584 million of revenue, £288 million of commercial revenue, £167 million in broadcast, £131 million in match day, £55 million, and this is an estimate because it's not widely reported, in non-match day events. So this is what everyone gets very excited about with Spurs. It's the quality of the stadium, the ability of the business model to be diverse. So they make money from the NFL matches they host there, from concerts, from boxing.
And obviously that would be a great help for them in this situation.
Huge, right? They've got applications with the council to increase the number of events they can do. So there's lots of sides of the business away from football that you can look at as financially viable. But if, again, looking at this from a football perspective, they've got a wage bill at $260 million. And they have spent...
Can we just put that 260 million wage bill in? Like, people often say that Spurs, compared to other Big Six teams, spend less on wages.
Yeah.
And that's true, right? And they've been much criticised for that. Yeah? Their spending as a percentage of their revenues on their playing wages is about 45%, Charlie? Correct. Something like that?
44.5%.
When normally you'd expect that to be between 55 and 60%, right? So that's always something that was levied against Daniel Levy, is your underspending on playing wages. But nonetheless, it's still 260 million quid. When more modest Premier League clubs of the kind that they're now competing against, about half that. We're talking about 130, 140 million, something like that. So, huge differences. I mean, I'm thinking it's something like my old club, Sunderland, in their first season in the Premier League, I'm told that their wage bill is about 70 to 80 million. To Spurs is 260 million, and yet Sunderland are outperforming Spurs. So this is seismic.
Yeah. I mean, the big question there would be, if we're looking at this in the context of relegation, we got to probably lay out some things that we don't know, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
and one of the key things is, are there relegation clauses?
So I think contracts? So. What Charlie just said there is really important, which is that there are going to be some topics that we talk about where there's a lot that we know. It's in the public domain, or it's reasonably easy to get hold of the information if you know where to look. There's various stuff to do with the business of Tottenham Hotspur, which really nobody outside of the C-suite at Tottenham would necessarily know, which you can outline.
Well, one of them being, because we were talking about wages, the relegation clause that may exist in player contracts. You've highlighted that it is highly likely that a team that would class itself as a big six may not have the most secure contracts when it comes to relegation clauses. And to be clear, when we're talking about relegation clauses, we're talking about a reduction in player wages if relegation happens to occur. Quite often, I think, as we've said before, around 30 to 50% of a player's wage. So if a player's paid 100 grand in the Premier League, they could be paid 50 grand in the Championship. The reason that exists is to cover the risk that comes with a reduction in your revenue generating capability outside of the Premier League. So that would be a massive concern and a massive problem for Spurs if they didn't have those clauses in the players' contracts. It is also unclear. There's been a lot of speculation. The Telegraph did an interesting article on it, but the clauses in sponsorship agreements that are dependent on Premier League participation, the media exposure that comes with it. Now, it does say that missing Europe has 8-figure ramifications in a lot of these sponsorship contracts. Now, that's just for missing Europe. Can you imagine the ramifications of getting relegated on some of these deals, some of which are also expiring relatively soon?
I mean, eye-watering. I mean, absolutely eye-watering. So they've got about £300 million a year of commercial revenue. So it's basically half of their total revenue is commercial revenue. And that's great because it's pretty diversified. You've got loads of different partners. It's annually recurring. It is sensitive to playing performance, but it's not just sensitive to playing performance because there are things you're delivering just through being part of the Premier League, just through being part of the Champions League. There are things you are delivering which you can guarantee a sponsor. So the question is what would their commercial revenue be if they were relegated to the Championship? How many of those sponsors are coming out of contract anyway and would simply just not renew because they wouldn't want to be sponsoring Spurs in the Championship? How many of those sponsors have got clauses in their sponsorship agreements which specifically say what would happen in the event of a relegation from the Premier League? Right?
I mean, again, I'm just going to look at stuff that we do know and that has been reported. Let's say Nike pay Spurs 30 million a year, which is a reported fee. To put into context what happens if you miss your mark with some of those merchandise partners. If Man United miss out on Europe 2 years in a row, it's reported that they have to pay Adidas 10 million. Now apply that to Spurs, where you're likely to have similar situations where Nike are going to have contingencies in place protecting themselves from poor performance. AIA, the deal that they've got on front of shirt, that lasts until the end of next season. So they'll be protected next year, as in they would still have the sponsor unless there was a break clause at some point. Now, AIA then contracted to go onto their training kit at about 15 million a year after that until 2032. Does that contract agreement that they will have looked at as secure revenue up to 2032, does that suddenly change if the position and status of Spurs materially changes? These are the kind of questions.
I guess just as we don't know if Spurs have got relegation clauses in their playing contracts because they would have assumed that they weren't going to get relegated, and therefore when the player's agent said we don't want a relegation clause in the contract, which is what they always say, by the way, that's standard, right? The player's agent will say we don't want a relegation clause. Did Spurs stand there and go, well, actually, we insist on it? Or did they actually say, well, it's not really worth arguing the point because we know we're not going to get relegated? Likewise, on the other side of the table, when Spurs were negotiating commercial contracts with partners, did the partners have the foresight to think, I know it's very unlikely, but should we just make sure that there is something in there just in case?
Yeah.
Just in case, right? So we don't know this. These are unknowns.
So let me put this to you then, just to take this on. Let's say we have 600 million in revenue. Let's say by getting relegated, your broadcast goes from 160 to 50. Let's say 100 million is wiped off that. Let's just say, hypothetically, 100 million is wiped off your commercial. So let's put it down at 400 mil. Then let's have a look at maybe some other costs like match day, attendance suffering, and some merchandise, etc. So you get down to about 300 million.
Yeah.
We've just mentioned that you have a wage bill of 260 million. We've mentioned the fact, I haven't actually mentioned, but if we're looking at the amortization requirements that they have likely on a number of transfers of players that they've brought in, which comes to 322 million in transfer fees in recent years, I think a net of about 250 in the last year and a half. You've got big servicing agreements on those contracts.
Yeah.
So we've got a number of issues.
So just to make it clear to listeners, what we mean by that is just what we said about Leicester, which is when Spurs have been signing players, they will not have been paying all that money up front. So they've had a net transfer spend over the last couple of seasons of 250 million. They would not have paid out 250 million. Of that 250 million, probably only half of it would have been paid up until this point. So they probably got between 100 and 150 million pounds of outstanding transfer fees to pay.
So we're looking at halving our revenue, but still having huge commitments. If we're talking about getting relegated and we're looking at the big financial problems that will arise from it, we know what we'll lose. But how do you think they will look to make money? Is it as simple to go, the players will be sold?
Yes, and that's not voluntary. There are certain players who are clearly super elite players who will knock on the door saying, we're out. And Spurs will say, sure, good. Thank God for that. You are out, you're correct. And then it's a very open process, which is how much money can we get for you? Bit of an arm wrestle, which is sometimes the club that's willing to pay the most for a player is not necessarily the same club that player wants to go to.
Yep.
That's a bit of an arm wrestle sometimes, right? So, but nonetheless, if you look at Van de Ven, Kulusevski, Romero, Solanke, Bergveld, Jed Spence, these guys are not going to stick around at Tottenham in the Championship, and nor should they, and Tottenham need to make sure they don't. Now, the nightmare is if one or two of them get long-term injuries, which then means they're unsaleable, but Tottenham are still on the hook for their enormous salaries. Now, that is a real problem, right? But let's just assume that all of those big stars leave, and that Tottenham sell them for, let's say, a couple of £100 million of incoming. That won't, again, all be paid up front, by the way. That'll be 100 million up front. So they use that 100 million up front to help pay their outstanding transfer payments that they owe to other clubs. And that then becomes a bit of a wash. But at the same time, those players disappearing off the wage bill means that their wage bill reduces from, let's say, 260 million down to something more like 150 million. That kind of stuff, right? Now, then you've got all their other expenses. And again, we don't know. We do not have the detail. We need to have access to somebody at the club, or maybe to Daniel Levy, what it might be, to really understand what all this detail is. But broadly speaking, it looks like their cost base outside of those playing wages is 450 million, something like that. Yep. So some of those things are costs you cannot reduce. The costs of cutting grass on pitches does not change because you move from one division to another division. The cost of your utilities bill for actually keeping the lights on the stadium does not change. But there are things that do change. So we can sort of assume that those operating costs might come down to, I don't know, from 400, 450 to 250, maybe 300. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, that you've got your numbers right in terms of the revenue. And let's say that they can maintain the revenue at something like 300 million, which would be an extraordinary feat for a club that's outside of the top flight, but would nonetheless be 50% of what they're receiving right now. So the question now is, okay, what are the costs going to be? And what's that loss rate going to be? Because don't forget, they're now coming down into a cost control regime where you're only allowed to lose £15 million a year, and where the Football League, and indeed now the football regulator, will be sitting down with the Spurs finance department saying, can you explain to us how you're going to get your losses down to £15 million a year? We might give you 1 year of transitional grace if you show us how you're going to get there in year 2, right? Now that starts to become really challenging. I mean, that really starts to become challenging, because what you then quite often say as a club is, yeah, but, lay off a bit, mate, right? We're going to get promoted this season. What the regulator then says, and I've had these conversations before with EFL executives, is, well, we can't underwrite that. You might hope that, but we can't guarantee that. Look what happened to Leicester and Southampton last season.
Look what happened to Sunderland.
Look what happened to Sunderland, right? They went down and they went down again. So we cannot sit here and say that we're okay with you not having a plan in place to reduce your costs in this way, because we're on the hook if you then don't fulfill your objectives on the pitch. Do you remember Leicester's excuse for failing their cost control mechanisms? Well, we didn't play as well as we'd hoped, and we didn't do as well in the transfer market as we
had to sack Brendan as well.
Yeah, Brendan had to go, and all this type of stuff.
We didn't have as good window as we could have done.
So these things are not accepted by the regulators as being excuses for overspending. And yet it's quite hard to see how, even with an enormous revenue like 300 million, it's quite hard to see how Spurs are going to balance the books. And the only thing I can imagine is that you'll basically have to get into fire sale territory, right? Where pretty much not just the big stars, but pretty much everybody else, and then your best under 21s, everyone's flying out the door just to try and get cash in, both to help balance the books from a financial perspective, although the Lewis family, who own and control Spurs right now, might say, well, we'll help with that, it's fine. But also to demonstrate to the Football League and the IFR that you are actually genuinely committed to coming on a trajectory to getting your costs down. But ultimately, I can't see, if they were to stay in the Championship for any length of time beyond one season, I cannot see how you can operate that stadium and that training ground and that setup without having at least Premier League TV revenues, but more likely also European revenues as well as the types of commercial revenues that you naturally have when you are playing in those types of divisions. I just can't see how Spurs medium term can be fitted into an EFL environment.
Charlie, can you imagine if Spurs got relegated and won the Champions League?
That would be a very Spurs thing to do, wouldn't it?
We're going to have European football just to maintain our 50 to 60 million European financial commitments, which are obviously going to help us carry through, Mr. Regulator.
That would be a very Spurs thing to do, wouldn't it?
Winning anything is not very Spurs. Now, obviously, they did all right last season, but...
Well, I guess actually it would be a more Spurs thing to do, to get through to the Champions League final and then lose it at the last minute,
there we go,
to then put you into a whole new world of financial hurt.
Maybe they bring Ange back.
Well, there are all sorts of controversial former managers they could bring back. Wow. We'll come on to one later on.
Yeah, exactly. But I think something you touched on there is, we believe, if you're looking at this, the first season isn't the disaster. The disaster, yes, of course, is this happening to a Big Six club, which has one of the best pieces of infrastructure in sport in this country, if not the best, putting itself outside of the top tier. That's not good for anyone. If they bounce straight back, there's probably enough mechanisms, there's enough of the broader business model which could support the 50 to 70 million, let's say, that they will generate from other activities away from football, that would mean that the club wouldn't be in dire straits financially. It's year 2 and 3. It's if we start looking at it slightly longer term, if that year 1 doesn't create the bounce back that you would hope, that's where we look at this as a real issue that, if we're being honest, the EFL probably is absolutely terrified for, because having a club like Spurs going into the serious problems while living in your league is not necessarily the best thing. And you mentioned what the account manager of poor Leicester's doing. Imagine what the account manager of Spurs.
Well, I think we should close this off by saying that it's still less likely rather than more likely that this happens, isn't it?
Yeah.
5-1 is not 5-1 on, it's 5-1 against. It is much more likely that one of those other clubs will have a very poor end to the season, or that West Ham's recent revival stops. It is much more likely that happens rather than that Spurs do go down. They don't need to get that many more points. We're probably talking about 3 wins and a couple of draws between now and the end of the season. But I think it's perfectly reasonable at this point, as you come towards March, to raise it as being an active possibility, and conceiving of the extraordinary scene financially and in regulatory terms that this thing, that over the last 20 years, the Big Six has accelerated so far ahead of everybody else that nobody's actually ever got their head around, well, yeah, but what happened if they got relegated? It's not just it hasn't happened. Until last season, when Man United and Spurs were quite far down, but as you say, they were never actually in any real risk. But until that point, members of the Big Six had never even come close. Not within 5 or 6 points, 7 points. So it was never really an active conversation even. Whereas now it's looking like it should at least be an active conversation. And it will inform, I think, some of the thinking which the independent football regulator, who's currently writing or researching to write the State of the Game report, which is then going to be put in place the structure that governs professional football in this country going forward, including the flows of TV money and all this type of stuff. And one of the things it's meant to address is what's called the cliff edges. So these are the massive disparities in your viability depending on what division you're in, and trying to smooth out those cliff edges. It would be fascinating to understand how they are viewing that whilst writing that report, and at the same time looking at this possibility of Spurs being relegated in the Championship and thinking, crikey, that's not even a cliff edge. That's something more dramatic than that.
I think a lot of fans will also, before we move on, reference Stadium. Just to, a quick one on that. It supposedly cost around $1 billion to build it. They service it at 25 to 40 million a year on the debt they borrowed against it, which is reportedly around 850 million. Again, short term, they can manage that. Longer term, we talked about the cost of broader infrastructure last week with Leicester, training facilities, big stadia.
Yeah. And you've got to remember, it's different cost controls measure different things. So when you've got a profit and sustainability cost control, that measures losses. I know it's weird because profit and sustainability, right? That's
the great joke of this.
That's the great joke, is it's neither profitable nor sustainable.
You're allowed to lose 105 million over 3 years, Premier League teams, and that's classed as sustainable.
Yeah. So, but in a way, that system is very penal to this type of situation because it counts your total losses. When you go on to a percentage-based system, which the Premier League are now moving on to, that is focused on your first team spend. So you could be paying other things, right? You could be paying off debt on your stadium and all this type of stuff, and that's not really addressed within cost control mechanisms. You're allowed to invest in your stadium. You're allowed to invest in your academy. That's up to you. This is focused on your first team spend. So Spurs would be okay, ironically, under the new, not just okay, they would be the gold star performers because they only spend 45% of their total revenues on their wages in the Premier League. Albeit under these regulations, you do have to include transfer spending as well, so that would balance things off quite considerably. But then you come down to the Championship. The Championship is the last division that is still operating profit and sustainability rules, where it is about your loss, how much you lose overall. Well, as I say, watch this space. I've got a soft spot for Spurs. Look, you can look at me like that all you want, right? But that's just the bottom line. I was a consultant there. And like you, I've got a lot of friends who are Arsenal fans, and it's difficult to bear the gloating. So I've got a soft spot for Spurs.
I'm glad you've only revealed this now.
I definitely don't want them to go down, and I do at the same time want the football world to take it very seriously.
Look, Schadenfreude aside, I don't think anyone really does. If I'm being completely honest, you need your biggest clubs competing in the top. It's good for everyone. It's good for the system.
Yeah.
So let's hope it doesn't happen. This is still hypothetical, but
very hypothetical, as has happened with a few of the other topics that we've raised.
They've actually happened.
They then go on to happen.
Yeah. Number 2, happier time.
Yes.
Really positive because we've seen some
Honey
fantastic performances. We talked about the weekend sport, and I'm actually now deeply regretting it and very sorry that we didn't mention Team GB's excellent showing over the 48 hours that saw us win 2 skeleton medals and our first ever medal on snow in snowboarding.
Am I allowed to say that it wasn't exactly the same as winning the men's downhill?
No, of course not, Charlie. Of course not.
I know I'm sort of fuddy-duddy and sort of, concerned about these things, but I think what was it called? Is some sort of mixed doubles version of snowboarding?
Yeah, snowboard cross. Yeah, mixed snowboard cross, big final.
It sort of makes the the mile at the Summer Olympics seem like a sort of small event, doesn't it?
Charlie, it's a fantastic
gold's a gold.
Gold is a gold.
Gold's a gold
on snow, and I think as we'll touch on here when we're looking at the funding that gets put into these sports. Quite an extraordinary achievement when the competition that Team GB is up against in some of these sports spends so much more.
And also has obviously massively significant sort of natural advantages.
Completely. Now,
because unless you are one of those very rare British people who happens to come from Aviemore, your access to ski slopes is limited.
Anyway, for context, we thought we'd do a quick look at some of the funding that goes into the Team GB Winter Olympic operations. There was a lot of criticism as we started to lose or miss out on a few medals last week. Criticism maybe is the wrong word.
Sorry, I don't think it is the wrong word. I think it was starting. The bandwagon was starting to roll, saying, "Well, we waste an awful lot of money, all this stuff." But the bottom line is actually, it's not much.
It's not much.
Sorry, in the big scheme of things, I know that it would for you or for me to have that amount of money to spend on a nice new car or a house. Yes, it's a lot of money. We're not saying that 30 million quid over a cycle is not a lot of money. Of course, it is. But in the big scheme of our national expenditure, it's it's not even a drop in the ocean.
The soft power that comes with it. You look at the feeling and the excitement that's been generated. That's worth the 30 million over a 4 year cycle.
Can you explain what we mean by funding over a cycle, Charlie?
Funding over a cycle is looking at how much money we invest in our Olympic or Winter Olympic sports over a 4 year period. 4 years being the time in between Olympic Games. So when we talk about this, there's a total across those four. So this one's about 32 million. Yep. So we look at that as an 8 million spend per year. Now, to put that into context, we spend 330 million, or we have committed 330 million pounds across 50 sports for LA 2028 Summer Olympic Games. So what we invest in our Winter Olympic sports is 10% of what we invest in our summer. Now, as you've highlighted, that is absolutely expected. The UK has no natural winter sports infrastructure, really. It has a very small participation base. Often, actually, it searches other sports to get a lot of its talent, which is why we've been quite good at things like skeleton, where you can have, and bobsled, where you can have sprinters, for example, come into it. I think also there's minimal domestic commercial market, which is something that supports sport as well, massively. So it's not surprising this happens, but we still treat this, as we do with a lot of sports, very seriously. And where I've found it interesting over the last few days was really starting to look at why we are much better in some sports than others. And it's because of, I think, the identification of areas where we can be successful, where there are fewer participants. And we use the skeleton as a good example for this. Yeah. Did you know Team GB is the most successful country currently in skeleton in the Olympics? So it's won 5 golds, 1 silver, and 5 bronzes.
Skeleton is exactly the kind of thing. If you're sat here saying, and you're in the British Olympic Committee, and you're saying, right, how are we going to try and make sure we win some medals? Right, so here's a sport that we can contribute some money to. And they actually spend quite a lot of money on it. They spend 5.5 million over 4 years, which is not that much less than we spend on ski and snowboard, which is just over 7 million. So we spent, if you combine the figure for skeleton and bobsleigh, which are two closely aligned events, certainly as aligned as ski and snowboard are, we actually spend more on skeleton and bobsleigh than we do on ski and snowboard.
See, that to me is very sensible, because we know we're not going to out-Norway Norway.
Right. Or in the case of ski, out-Swiss the Swiss.
Or out-Swiss the Swiss. Yeah. So where have you got a better chance of winning?
Yeah.
Those ice sheets. And
there's also, you can actually practice that in the UK.
Yeah.
So a lot of the work that's done for skeleton is done at places like Bath, in the, sort of athletics training centres there, which is done on, the equivalent of their equivalent of a dry ski slope, because so much of the training is about the start. So it's sprint training fundamentally. As you say, a lot of sprinters go into it. In bobsleigh, I think the lady who is our monobob, so that's when there's only one person in the bobsleigh, she is also one of the 3 leading shot putters in the country as well.
Yeah.
So you're talking about a power event, somebody who can push out a big moment of power at a certain moment in time to get something heavy moving, being reasonably easily translatable into bobsleigh, because she's still then in the summers competing in the shot put. So it's a very particular type of sport.
So I was actually looking and comparing it to our approach to summer games, because we've actually done something similar, and we may think we're amazing at lots of things, but we actually focused heavily on sports where you could look at with the same criteria, track cycling, rowing and sailing being ones I've seen us be particularly successful in, where we're not trying to outdo Kenya and Ethiopia on the track.
I think cycling is the one to focus on here, because rowing and sailing are things where we're the ones with the natural advantages. We're the ones with lots of big rivers, where a lot of the population centres are on those big rivers, and they aren't like they're not fast running rivers. They're rivers that you actually can row on. But cycling is an interesting one, because cycling is one where historically we weren't very good at it. We didn't win very much. But they decided that this is something that we could excel at if we really did put our mind to it. And obviously the result has been quite extraordinary over the last 20 years in terms of return on investment.
So dominant.
Yeah.
So when you actually look at this and look at some of that critique,
it's strategic.
It's a very strategic.
You're talking about strategic funding,
completely.
And this came out of an Olympics that took place, maybe even the year you were born. The Atlanta Olympics, 1996.
92 was Barcelona.
No, so 96 was Atlanta. How old were you then?
2. 2.5. Yeah.
So do you know how many gold medals we got in that Summer Olympics?
None. One.
Yeah, Steve Redgrave and Matt Pinson, I think, in the rowing. And that was it. And after that, there was a big sort of, why oh why moment, and all the newspapers were so crap at everything at the time. We weren't very good at cricket either, and the whole thing was a bit of a misery. So they then sat down and said, right, the National Lottery was happening around the same time. It was exactly around that time, and part of the purpose of the lottery was to produce funds for this kind of thing. So it all happened quite serendipitously, but at the same time quite strategically.
Yeah.
A mixture of performing very, very badly at the Summer Olympics, combined with lottery money coming on board, has then led to strategic placement of that money over a protracted period of time.
I think it is important to state, if there's a volatility in this model, it is the fact it's dependent on medal success. So if you stop achieving success in the sports that are getting funded, i.e. if you stop getting medals, the amount of funding you receive reduces. So it's very much something where they need to see the outputs come through. And I just actually put together a small comparison to Norway, because there were some amazing things I looked at when going through this. Firstly, unsurprisingly, massive state funding, reportedly around 100 million per cycle. Yeah. So we're talking about a significant amount more money put in. Now, yes, as we know, Norwegian kids are basically born with skis on. So it is very much in their identity. Yeah. These sports fit very much into their culture.
And for a certain type of Norwegian boy, ski jumping is a big deal.
As we know from last week. Of which they have done quite well as well, I would say, in the ski jumping. So no surprises there. But what I've just said were the things that I would have assumed. If I had not looked at anything previous to this, I would have just said, it's kind of very local to them. And that's
it happens naturally. Yeah.
However, looking at statements, we love statements. There's the New York Times did an interesting piece, because they were so confused at how this tiny little country, which I think they said was about the size of Minnesota, how could that possibly challenge the might of the USA? And so the Norwegian responses around their success have been quite interesting, and I just want to read out
Scandinavian,
a little quote.
Haven't they?
They have been very Scandinavian.
Sort of, it's charmingly Scandinavian.
That's brilliant, and especially when you listen to this coming from Tor Overbo, who's Norway's chief of these sports. He said a lot of the countries visit the Olympiatoppen to figure out what a Norwegian's doing, and when they come, they're disappointed. The facilities
not just about lip filler and penises.
It's not just. There's more to it than how we.
There's more to
basically very crassly summed it up last week. The facilities are modest. The schedule is sane. The people are perfectly willing to share their secrets with anyone willing to listen. The philosophy of humanistic development and joy for all. Joy for all, kind of waxing lyrical about raising happy children, focused athletes, healthy citizens.
It's like sort of Heidi yodeling in the valleys. I know that was Swiss, but it sort of conjures up that type of wholesomeness.
They're very relaxed. As a part Norwegian myself,
I didn't realize you were part Norwegian, Charlie.
I still have Norwegian family, so still living out there now. So it's not even like I'm trying to claim this. Just as Norway sit atop the medal table. And
ski jumpers?
No, not ski jumpers actually. Football players. That makes me worried. I didn't get any notes from them after last week either, so we'll see. But what they do seriously say, this is about enjoyment. This is about kids finding a place where they can have fun, right? And they don't actually professionalize anything, or they don't really try and focus kids until they're 13 and over. That's when they start getting their real dedication and should we say, pathway focus towards some of these sports. So if you look at, how other countries do it, we drill our kids from the ages of 3, 4 into some things, and it's all about getting them to a level where they can compete. Norway have the complete reverse when it comes down to their winter sports, and it looks like that's working. Affordable. That was the other thing.
Yeah,
I had one more thing. One more thing that came in there. It was the affordability of it. They just make it accessible, where grassroots, early stage sport, particularly in the US, it's becoming more expensive.
It is going to be more accessible when the whole country's covered in snow all the time. In America, there are parts of America that do have a lot of snow, but there are equally huge tracts of America where there is no snow. So making it really, saying to a kid who's growing up in Dallas, Texas, I'll tell you what, we're going to make it affordable and accessible for you to get up to Aspen on a regular basis. Yeah. Not quite so straightforward. Yeah. I may hazard. So I think they do have a huge natural advantage.
Charlie, make the data work for you, okay?
Oh, okay.
I'm just trying to make this fit my narrative.
Try. Sorry.
But you look at how they've... Johannes Kleibo, the guy that's just won 9 gold medals.
Yeah, I saw that.
Absolutely incredible. One of the most successful Winter Olympian now ever for people that haven't seen. I think he's still got a chance to win 2 more. This guy's a national. He's literally Erling Haaland level. Yeah. And any country that treats or creates personalities and profiles out of that from their sports, they're going to be doing well.
It makes a big difference, doesn't it? I mean, it's rather like thinking how about other countries look at our darting success? They look at our pot-bellied heroes and go, how can we create the natural hard-drinking pub scene that you require to turn out top Arrows men like Luke Littler?
God, we've missed that on our past darts.
The performance pathway.
The performance pathway. Do you
think
UK sport would ever fund darts? Could do.
Well, it depends. If it became an Olympic sport, I think we would be to darting Olympics like the Norwegians are to ski jumping.
100%. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
The facilities, the training facilities we have in every watering hole.
Rather like you're saying with the joy and all this type of stuff, if you took the darts players out of their pubs and put them into elite training facilities, would you get the same outcome?
I just think the definition of elite training facility slightly changes. Because
you think that's some sort of beer warehouse?
Well, exactly.
Some sort of beer warehouse with sort of industrial amounts of beer.
Yeah. It'd be an interesting question to ask. Our point being here, we actually think that the return on investment that comes from the success the Winter Olympics has shown is absolutely worth the investment. 32 million over a 4-year cycle is a relatively small amount compared to how we spend money in other areas.
It's good value.
And personally, I think it's been really great to see a lot of this. Even if we end with 3, and interestingly, our medals target was 8 going into this, but we'd never won more than 1 gold going into a games, and we've now won 3. So I would still imagine, even if the total hasn't been hit, and our curlers have been slightly disappointing.
I remember you being very keen on the curling. I'm a little bit less hyped up about it, but
I've been less keen this time because we haven't done as well. I just follow where the medals are.
Must be your Norwegian side.
It must be.
Right.
It must be. I live for the Winter Olympics.
Speaking of serial winners.
Well, I mean, I'm guessing you're referencing Jose.
I'm referencing your beloved former manager.
Real Madrid.
Yeah.
Very, very serious topic to cover. This really is important because this, from when I started writing some of this to when we actually came on air, I think 3 new things had changed. So just to be very clear on the topic we're talking about here, we are recording this a day after Real Madrid beat Benfica 1-0 in the first leg of their Champions League knockout match. And during that game, Vinicius Jr scored the only goal of the match. He ran off to celebrate excessively in the eyes of, well, the referee because he got a yellow card and then Jose Mourinho later in the game. But when he came back to the centre circle, he was reportedly racially abused by Benfica player Gianluca Prestiani. And if you've seen the video, it doesn't look great in the sense that Prestiani pulls his shirt over his mouth. If you can imagine that, or if you're watching, that will make more sense as I've just tried to replicate it. And Vinicius Jr then runs off to the referee and clearly says something has happened, at which point the referee makes the sign that he has had a racial incident reported to him and the team goes off the pitch. So it's really unfortunate that this is absolutely not the first time this has happened. This is also absolutely not the first time this has happened to Vinicius Jr, who seems to be one of the players who gets put through this ordeal more so
he's
than
pretty high profile, isn't he?
Else. He is.
He's pretty high profile.
And he's pretty good.
And he's very good.
Which means when he does something well, it seems to be something that either fans
he's a centre of attention,
players,
right? I mean, Vinicius Jr is a centre of attention, and therefore if you are the centre of attention, through no fault, in fact, quite the opposite of a fault, through your own brilliance, you are therefore going to attract other people's attention more than if you're average.
Absolutely.
So, it's not to be unexpected that good and bad things happen around Vinicius Jr, which is something we're about to come on to in a moment, through no fault of his.
So what happened on the pitch is awful and should never happen to a player if this did happen. And we do need to say, we are talking about this at the time where it is still reported, right? So we just want to be really
strongly
clear on
contested.
That. Strongly contested.
It's strongly contested. I think we should read out the Benfica and Prestiani statements.
So Prestiani came out after the game saying, I want to clarify that at no time did I direct racist insults to Vinny Jr, who regrettably misunderstood what he thought he heard. I was never racist with anyone, and I regret the threats I received from Real Madrid players.
Nothing to see here.
But not a staunch defence, I would say. It would be quite nice to know if he was accused of this and seriously disagreed with it. He would say, this is what I said. It has been completely misunderstood. I would like to see a stronger defence than that. Benfica then also published something quite astonishing in my eyes, up to your discretion. They said, as the image is shown, and it was accompanied, on Twitter with a video, of this actually unfolding. So their tweet said, as the images demonstrate, given the distance, the Real Madrid players could not have heard what they claim to have heard. So, in short, rather than saying, after the terrible accusations of last night, we are reviewing and will continue to review what happened, trying to put some form of holding process in place while they're trying to establish the facts, they have very clearly come out and put a marker in the sand on this incident and certainly fallen on the side of their player. The alleged act itself, shocking, and we never want to see it in football. But the real damage that we were talking about actually came in the press conference after the game with what Jose Mourinho said.
I think so. I think that's right. So Mourinho's comments afterwards, he said in the press conference, I told him, I told Vinicius Jr, when you score a goal like that, you just celebrate and walk back. There is something wrong because it happens in every stadium. A stadium where Vinícius plays, something happens, always. Right, so what Mourinho's saying is, I don't know what did happen or didn't happen, but if it did happen, then he deserved it.
You asked for it. It's victim blaming.
It is victim shaming. It's saying that, if you carry on behaving like that, then it is inevitable that you are going to be racially abused. Now, we are going to leave aside the actual incident itself. We've laid it out only because we want to discuss Mourinho's comments. Because Mourinho's comments are something which is more troublesome for football than one young idiotic player allegedly making a remark. And this was explained to me by, in recent times, I've had a couple of senior colleagues, both in my current roles at Mount Pleasant, but also Paul Elliott at Charlton. And Paul still is non-executive director at Charlton and has been for the last 30 to 40 years one of the leading exponents of the fight against racism in football. Dignified man, a quiet man, not a man who shouts and screams, a person who works with people to try to help improve the situation. Now, he grew up playing at a time when banana skins would be thrown at you on the pitch and people would shout and scream at you, all sorts of things. And he told me that whilst it clearly wasn't pleasant, that it was the way it was at the time, and if you want to be a footballer, you learn to live with it. It's something that he's very happy mostly does not happen anymore. It does sometimes, but it much less than in his day. But if you were to ask Paul, does that mean to say that there is no racism in football anymore? And I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I have spoken to him about it many, 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 many times, so I don't think I am. Paul would say no, because actually the hardest bit of racism to iron out is the last bit, which is the bit which operates at a higher level and which is basically an unconscious bias, where even the person who is holding that instinct and that view is not even aware that they are, and yet it's guiding their underlying thought patterns and therefore their decisions. So Paul would say, when asked the question, why is it that more boards do not appoint black managers, for instance, just to say one question, I'm somebody who has appointed black managers, so I am very conscious. I didn't do that in any case to try and prove a point. It's because amongst the potential applicants, they were the strongest applicants, as it happened on that particular occasion. I've also appointed many non-black managers. But Paul would say, when there is a situation where a black manager who is the most qualified for the job does not get it, the reason for that is not because the person who is making that decision is, quote, a racist. It's something which is hiding a little bit behind that, which is that there is a slight remaining imprint of perception, subtle nuances of perception, which is guiding that person in tight decisions away from doing what might be called the right thing, without even knowing it. And I read these comments from Mourinho and ask, is Mourinho, quote, a racist? No, I don't think he is. Mourinho would say, like many people who have been accused of racism, look at my track record, look at the black players who I've promoted, look at my Chelsea teams, look at all of my teams. I have been a champion of black players, etc. But it's all moments like this that reveal that he is a man of his era as well. Jose is 60. He's not 30, he's 60. And He's somebody who grew up in a different time, in a different place.
Charlie, these comments seem so careless, and he seems so
careless.
uncareless that it almost makes me worry more because of how Mourinho is. He normally, I would never accuse him of not being aware of the words that come out of his mouth. And this seems so careless in its delivery. It is so obvious to us reading it where the issues here lie. You cannot say
but this happens,
that because
Charlie,
you celebrate
this
like
happens,
this.
Charlie, when somebody is deeply convinced that they are not racist.
Can I add the second bit in, which I think is even worse, which he's reportedly reminded Vinícius that Benfica's greatest club legend was Eusebio.
And that's like the old thing, when someone's accused of racist saying, I've got lots of black friends. It's a lack of self-awareness is my point, right? So he is so clear in his own head that he's not racist, that he doesn't see the need to filter anything that he says for an imprint of underlying racism. That's why he just says what he thinks, what's on his mind at that particular point in time, because he is himself convinced, I am not racist, and therefore what I'm saying is simply the truth. But in that statement, it reveals that even though he is not quite a racist, that there are still some remaining prejudices. And the prejudice in this situation is that Vinicius Jr needs to be careful how he behaves if he does not want to be subjected to racist abuse. But the two things are totally separate. He's received a yellow card for over-celebrating. That's looked after by the regulations of the game. And one might just observe, and I hope this isn't being too snarky, that if the accusation here is that certain people over-celebrate in certain moments in time, how big is the bloody glass house that Jose Mourinho's in, right? Charging onto the pitch, knee sliding down the touchline, jumping on top of all his players while the game's still going on. Under those circumstances, would it be entirely understandable that somebody would come up to him and say something which is totally socially unacceptable? I don't think Mourinho would see it in that way. I really don't.
What do we think about the other side of it, which is how the situation played out on the pitch and the handling of this, because it seems to keep happening. We have punishments associated with it. Vinny Jr.'s statement was relatively suggestive to the fact he doesn't feel it's sufficient. He says, the first part of it, he says racists are above all cowards. They need to put their shirts in their mouths to show how weak they are. This bit though, but they have the protection of others who theoretically have an obligation to punish them. Nothing that happened today is new in my life or in my team's life. Now, to be very clear, the punishment is a minimum of 10 games if you are found to have racially abused another player. And it's also important to say that the protocols were followed yesterday. The referee did what he was supposed to have done. He took the teams off. But again, we're looking at a situation that has, and I hate to say it, will probably happen again. So are we doing enough? Is there enough action going around these situations where we have a sufficient deterrent in place to stop this happening on the pitch? You mentioned Paul's experience where he had fans abusing him. The difference between a fan doing it from a stand and one of your peers, a player doing it on the pitch, is significant.
Yeah.
And the fan bit may be hard to stamp out because one idiot can always ruin that.
But nonetheless, I wouldn't say it's been stamped out, but my goodness me, it's been massively reduced by the use of CCTV.
Yeah.
Right. So, and severe punishments. Let's be clear, very severe punishments. I'm going to be really interested on this one because Prestiani's saying he didn't say it. And everyone can see that if he did say it, you can't lip read because he's done it behind his shirt.
Why would you pull your shirt up?
Right? So if this were to go to a court of law, and if the burden of proof was on Vinicius Jr. to prove that Prestiani, who said he didn't say it, did say it, I don't know exactly how the law works in Spain, but in England, it's incumbent upon the person who is alleging the thing to prove it, and the defendant is innocent until proven guilty.
How much weight do you reckon Mbappe's statement has, where Mbappe said Prestiani clearly called Vinny Jr. a monkey? It happened 5 times. Is that evidence enough? Where you have someone...
I think this is what Mourinho is referring to. This is what when Mourinho says. Sorry, it wasn't Mourinho's statement. It was the Benfica tweet.
Yeah.
As the images demonstrate, given the distance, the Real Madrid players could not have heard what they claimed to have heard. I think that refers to that Mbappe statement or equivalent statements thereof, because
Camavinga's standing very close to him, Mbappe's a little further away.
And it would be, I think, quite difficult for them to hear that if it's behind a shirt, etc.
5 times as well, specific on a number.
I think it would be a shame if this particular situation degenerated into is Mbappe being 100% accurate. I think that'd be unfortunate. I think it would give a useful screen for Benfica and for Mourinho and for others to hide behind, when the actual core of the matter here is let's just being asked what we're being asked to believe by Prestiani. Let's just address that for a moment. Vinicius Jr. has scored a goal. He's in a moment of absolute jubilation. He's living in this amazing dream world where all his dreams are coming true, and this moment of elation. We're being asked to believe that at this moment he decides to cut short all of that for reasons unknown. Only imagine, in his imagination, he's decided to cut short all that for no reason whatsoever and accuse a fellow player of that particular thing in that particular moment. Yeah. Now, I'm not sure that what I'm about to say would stand up in a court of law, but it doesn't pass my smell test. It does not pass my smell test. Everything I'm looking at, from the action of lifting the shirt over here to the sudden end of elation and move into indignation, everything about that would suggest to me that he heard what he heard, and he heard it pretty clearly.
If it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck.
That's what it feels like to me. So the question now is what do authorities do about it? This is not the first time that Argentine players have been accused of this. He's a young player. He hasn't, I don't know how long he's been in Europe, but maybe it's not all that long, whatever it might be. It's difficult. In terms of the punishment, in terms of Mourinho's statement, it's not difficult. Because Mourinho has not even said there, I believe he didn't say it. Mourinho basically has said, well, he may well have said it, but actually, come on, what do you expect?
Don't celebrate like that.
Right? So that, for me, Mourinho is an open and shut case and an absolute indicator that at the highest levels of the game, there is still significant levels of unconscious bias. And for all of my, non-African Caribbean colleagues in the football industry who from time to time curl their lip and sort of arch their eyebrows when the subject comes up, read those comments by Mourinho. Yeah. Read those comments by Mourinho. It's still absolutely there, and there's still a lot of work to be done.
I think everything he does is deliberate, and that's where the careless side is most likely the answer. It's so damaging because it just basically creates an aura of acceptance around this stuff, and he is someone that people look up to and react to, as we all know.
Not me, I have to say.
So, no, I know, not you. Not Tottenham supporter, Tottenham sympathiser.
Well, don't forget, he was Tottenham's manager as well.
Which means you're even less likely to to support him. Yeah. After that magnificent stint. But yes, this will unfold. And
did you used to call him Agent Mourinho, like some of my Chelsea friends?
This will, important to say now, likely have unfolded significantly since we're talking about it. So we are talking about it within 24 hours of it happening.
Yeah.
But I think it's a really important point for us to discuss. This is a issue that seriously impacts the sporting ecosystem when it comes up, and especially for football. It's something that I think is absolutely essential that they start to get a grip on, and with Vinícius in particular, because he does seem to receive a huge amount of this.
He's one of the best players in the world. One of the best players in the world is going to receive attention, both good and bad, but that's not his fault. And he should not be adversely affected for being a great footballer.
Completely agree. Feels like we've done 15 topics today. Quite an incredible revisit back of Leicester, I must say. At the beginning, amazing to go back through that.
And I think we should say at this point, we have spoken a lot about Leicester. If anybody from Leicester City wants to come on or even message us to explain to us why we're wrong that they have financial difficulties, we're right here to hear that message, right? We're not here to sort of just move on to the next topic and just say, well, that's your bad luck, etc. No. If there was a record to be set straight and there is information which is not in the public domain but which would help to contextualize the situation, we're all ears.
Please do. Please do. Charlie, thank you. I think, again, another amazing chat, another great deep dive in a lot of these topics, and I can't wait to see what happens over the next week.
Thanks
Take care. I hope you get better.
Thank you.
We'll see you next week.
Thanks.